They laughed at the veteran in the wheelchair, but when the dog acted, everyone was in shock. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The morning sunlight filtered through the half-drawn blinds, casting warm stripes across Marcus Hayes's bedroom. He had been awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, counting the familiar cracks he knew by heart. Sleep had become a luxury since returning from Afghanistan 3 years ago. Next to his bed, Sentinel stirred, the German shepherd's ears perking up as he sensed his handler's wakefulness. The dog's amber eyes found Marcus's, communicating a wordless understanding that came from years of shared experiences. "Morning, boy," Marcus whispered, reaching out to scratch behind Sentinel's ears. The dog leaned into his touch, a low, contented rumble emanating from his chest. Another day in Paradise Falls, Marcus thought, his eyes drifting to the wheelchair positioned beside his bed. The small town nestled in the Colorado mountains had seemed like the perfect place to rebuild his life after the IED that had taken his legs and ended his military career. His grandfather's cabin, left to him in a will that had arrived while he was still recovering at Walter Reed, offered solitude and a fresh start, away from pitying glances and uncomfortable conversations. With practiced movements, Marcus pulled himself up and into the wheelchair. Every motion was deliberate, refined through years of adaptation. At 34, he had rebuilt his upper body strength to compensate for what he had lost. Sentinel watched attentively, only moving when Marcus was securely seated. "Let's get some coffee, huh?" Marcus said, his voice still rough with sleep. Sentinel padded alongside the wheelchair as they made their way to the kitchen. The cabin had been modified for accessibility. Doorways widened, counters lowered, ramps installed where steps had once been. It was home now, more so than the crowded apartment in Chicago where he'd grown up. By Sunday, the morning routine was sacred. Coffee for Marcus, fresh water for Sentinel, and a few minutes on the porch watching the sun climb higher over the mountains. Today, however, they had errands to run. The pantry was getting bare, and Marcus had promised to meet with the new physical therapist at the community center in town. "Ready to face the masses?" Marcus asked, clipping Sentinel's service vest into place. The dog stood perfectly still, as if understanding the importance of his role. The transformation was immediate, from companion to working dog, alert and focused. Sometimes Marcus caught glimpses of Sentinel's military training shining through his service dog demeanor, moments when the dog's posture shifted to something more vigilant, more tactical. The drive into town was peaceful, the winding mountain roads offering views that still took Marcus's breath away even after 3 years. Sentinel sat in the specially modified passenger seat, his eyes scanning the passing landscape. The town of Paradise Falls came into view, a picturesque collection of storefronts and homes that looked like they belonged on a postcard. Marcus parked his adapted truck in front of Garrison's grocery, reaching for his wheelchair from behind the seat. Sentinel waited patiently until Marcus was settled before jumping down, immediately positioning himself at his handler's side. "Good boy," Marcus murmured, adjusting his service dog's vest. "Let's make this quick." The small bell above the door announced their arrival, causing a few heads to turn. Marcus had grown accustomed to the stares, a combination of curiosity about his wheelchair and admiration for Sentinel, whose dignified presence commanded respect. Most people in town had gotten used to seeing them together, but there were always newcomers or tourists passing through. "Morning, Marcus," called Tom Garrison from behind the counter. The store owner was one of the first people who had made Marcus feel welcome when he arrived in Paradise Falls. "Need any help today?" "I'm good, Tom. Just picking up a few things," Marcus replied, navigating his wheelchair down the first aisle with Sentinel following closely. Marcus had his shopping down to a science, knowing exactly which aisles were wide enough for his wheelchair and which items were within reach. Sentinel occasionally retrieved items from lower shelves, performing the task with a precision that spoke of extensive training. As Marcus turned into the produce section, he nearly collided with a shopping cart pushed by a woman he didn't recognize. She was perhaps in her early 40s, expensively dressed with the polished appearance of someone not from a small mountain town. "Oh, I'm sorry," Marcus said, backing up his wheelchair to give her space. The woman's eyes flicked from Marcus to Sentinel, her expression shifting from surprise to disapproval. "You really shouldn't have dogs in a grocery store," she said, her voice carrying enough to attract attention from nearby shoppers. "It's unsanitary." Marcus took a deep breath, an old familiar tension creeping into his shoulders. "He's a service dog," he explained, gesturing to Sentinel's clearly marked vest. "He's allowed by law to be here." The woman's lips pressed into a thin line. "Everyone claims their pets are service dogs these days. There should be stricter regulations." A few months ago, Marcus might have let the comment slide, too tired to educate yet another person about service animal laws. But today, something in the woman's dismissive tone ignited a spark of defiance. "Sentinel is a trained service dog," he said firmly. "He helps me with mobility and retrieval tasks." The woman glanced skeptically at Sentinel, who remained perfectly composed beside Marcus. "Well, he should at least be muzzled. You never know with these animals." Tom Garrison, who had been restocking a nearby shelf, stepped forward. "Mrs. Blackwood, I can assure you that Marcus and Sentinel are regular customers here. The dog is exceptionally well behaved." "Blackwood?" Marcus repeated, the name clicking into place. "As in Blackwood Development?" The woman straightened slightly. "Yes. My husband and I are developing the old mill property into vacation homes." Her tone suggested this should impress him, or perhaps explain her presence in this small-town grocery store. The Blackwood Development project had been the talk of Paradise Falls for months. Some welcomed the economic boost, while others worried about changing the town's character. Marcus had largely stayed out of the debate, focused on his own recovery. "Well, Mrs. Blackwood," Marcus said, keeping his voice level, "I appreciate your concern, but Sentinel stays with me. It's my right and his job." Mrs. Blackwood's eyes narrowed slightly. "I understand accommodations need to be made, but there are limits to what's reasonable. My nephew has allergies. What if he were here?" Before Marcus could respond, a young man in a store apron approached with a mop. "Clean up in aisle 4, he announced, barely glancing at them. "See?" Mrs. Blackwood gestured triumphantly. "Hygiene concerns are legitimate." Marcus felt heat rising in his face. Sentinel, sensing his handler's distress, pressed closer to the wheelchair, his posture alert but calm. "My dog didn't make that mess," Marcus said quietly, conscious of the growing audience their conversation was attracting. "And service dogs are specifically trained for public settings." Mrs. Blackwood seemed unmoved. "I'm merely suggesting that some consideration for others would be appropriate. Perhaps shopping online would be more suitable for your situation." The implication hung in the air, that Marcus and Sentinel were the problem, not her attitude. Marcus felt a familiar rage building, the kind he'd worked through in countless therapy sessions. Sentinel sensed the shift, pressing his nose gently against Marcus's hand, a calming technique they had practiced many times. "I have every right to shop here," Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Sentinel is essential for my independence." Mrs. Blackwood sighed dramatically. "I'm only thinking of public health. You military types always think the rules don't apply to you." The comment stung more than Marcus wanted to admit. He noticed Tom Garrison stepping forward again, concern etched on his face, but Marcus raised a hand slightly, indicating he could handle this. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, his voice now carrying the authority that had once commanded troops, "Sentinel is not just any dog. He's trained to assist me with daily tasks that most people take for granted. The Americans with Disabilities Act protects my right to have him with me in public spaces. This isn't about special treatment, it's about equal access." Sentinel remained perfectly still throughout the exchange, his behavior a testament to his training. Only someone who knew him well would notice the subtle signs of alertness, the slight forward tilt of his ears, the focused attention on his handler, ready to respond to any command or need. Mrs. Blackwood seemed momentarily taken aback by Marcus's composed response. Her eyes flickered to Sentinel again, this time noting the military patches on his service vest, details she had apparently overlooked in her initial assessment. "Well," she said, adjusting her designer handbag on her shoulder, "I still think there should be more regulation. Not everyone claiming to need a service animal actually does." With that parting shot, she pushed her cart past them, her posture rigid with disapproval. Marcus exhaled slowly, the confrontation leaving him more drained than he wanted to admit. Sentinel looked up at him, unwavering support in his intelligent eyes. "Don't worry about her," Tom said quietly, approaching once Mrs. Blackwood was out of earshot. "The Blackwoods have been ruffling feathers all over town since they arrived. She complained about the organic section not being extensive enough yesterday." Marcus managed a smile. "Thanks, Tom. Some days are easier than others." "You and Sentinel are always welcome here," Tom assured him, before returning to his stalking duties. Marcus continued his shopping, trying to shake off the encounter, but Mrs. Blackwood's words echoed in his mind. It wasn't the first time he'd faced prejudice about Sentinel, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. But something about her entitled dismissal of his needs had gotten under his skin. As they approached the checkout counter, Marcus noticed Mrs. Blackwood watching them from another line, her expression still disapproving. Sentinel, ever attentive, stayed perfectly positioned beside the wheelchair, his discipline bearing a stark contrast to the accusations of being an unruly pet. Little did Mrs. Blackwood know that Sentinel was far more than just a service dog. The German Shepherd's background, like Marcus's own, contained chapters that most civilians could never understand. Marcus finished his shopping with a lingering sense of unease. Encounters like the one with Mrs. Blackwood always left him feeling exposed, as if his hard-won independence was somehow provisional, subject to the approval of others. He paid for his groceries, thanked Tom, and headed out to his truck, Sentinel maintaining perfect heel position beside the wheelchair. As Marcus loaded his purchases into the truck, he noticed Mrs. Blackwood emerging from the store, her attention focused on her phone. She didn't look their way, but her earlier words had already done their damage. Marcus felt the familiar tightening in his chest that his therapist had taught him to recognize as the beginning of anxiety. "It's okay, boy," he murmured to Sentinel, though the reassurance was as much for himself as for the dog. "We've dealt with worse." Sentinel nudged Marcus's hand with his nose, an act of comfort they hadn't explicitly trained for, but that had developed naturally over their years together. The simple gesture centered Marcus, bringing him back to the present moment. The community center was their next stop. The new physical therapist had reached out last week, suggesting some innovative water therapy techniques that might help with Marcus's chronic pain. Since leaving the hospital, Marcus had been diligent about his physical therapy, determined to maximize his mobility and strength. It wasn't about false hope for walking again, the damage was too extensive for that, but about living fully within his new reality. The Paradise Falls Community Center had been renovated the previous year with accessibility in mind, making it one of Marcus's favorite places in town. As he parked and transferred to his wheelchair, he noticed the time. They were running a bit late after the delay at the grocery store. "Let's move, Sentinel," he said, and the dog immediately fell into position. Inside, the center hummed with activity. A children's art class was letting out, and a group of seniors was gathering for what looked like a yoga session. Marcus navigated through the bustling lobby, nodding at familiar faces as he made his way to the therapy room. Dr. Eliza Chen was waiting by the pool, clipboard in hand. In her early 30s, with an athletic build and a practical ponytail, she had the focused energy of someone passionate about their work. "Marcus Hayes," she called, extending her hand as he approached. "I'm Dr. Chen. Great to meet you in person." "Sorry I'm late," Marcus said, shaking her hand. "Had a situation at the grocery store." "Doctor?" Chen's eyes moved to Sentinel, who sat alertly beside the wheelchair. "And this must be your service dog. Magnificent animal." "This is Sentinel," Marcus confirmed, noticing with appreciation that Dr. Chen didn't immediately try to pet the dog or make baby talk at him, as many people did despite the working dog do not pet patches on his vest. "Military trained?" she asked, noting the specialized patches. Marcus nodded, surprised by her perception. "We served together. He was repurposed as a service dog after my injury." "Impressive," Dr. Chen said. "I worked with veterans at the VA in Denver before moving here. Saw some incredible partnerships between handlers and their dogs." She gestured toward the pool area. "Shall we discuss your therapy options?" The next hour was productive. Dr. Chen outlined a water therapy program that would allow Marcus to exercise without putting pressure on his residual limbs. She was knowledgeable, direct, and refreshingly treated him like any other patient. "The water provides resistance without impact," she explained as they sat by the edge of the pool. "We'll start twice weekly and adjust based on your progress." Sentinel lay quietly nearby, still technically on duty but relaxed in the secure environment. Marcus found himself genuinely optimistic about the new therapy regimen. As they were wrapping up, the door to the pool area opened, and Marcus felt his mood instantly darken. Richard Blackwood strode in, followed by a man in a suit carrying architectural plans. Unlike his wife, Blackwood acknowledged Marcus with a nod. "Hayes," he said curtly. Then turning to Dr. Chen, "Doctor, sorry to interrupt. We're doing a walkthrough of the facility to discuss our donation for the new therapeutic wing." Richard Blackwood was everything his wife was: polished, wealthy, entitled, but with the additional edge of someone used to getting his way in business dealings. Marcus had seen his type before: men who viewed philanthropy as an extension of their business strategy rather than genuine altruism. "Of course, Mr. Blackwood," Dr. Chen replied professionally. "We were just finishing up. I can show you around in 5 minutes." Blackwood's eyes drifted to Sentinel, then back to Marcus. "My wife mentioned meeting you earlier. She has some concerns about animals in public spaces." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "Your wife made her opinions very clear." "She can be a bit direct," Blackwood said with a dismissive wave. "But you have to understand her position. As major donors to this community, we have certain expectations about standards and protocols." The implication was clear. Their money gave them the right to set the rules, even regarding legally protected rights like service animal access. "Mr. Blackwood," Marcus began, his voice controlled despite his rising anger. "Sentinel is a highly trained service dog. He has more discipline and training than most people." Blackwood raised an eyebrow. "I'm sure he's well trained, Hayes. But as we develop more properties in Paradise Falls and bring in a higher caliber of visitors, certain accommodations may need to be reconsidered." Dr. Chen cleared her throat. "Mr. Blackwood, service animals are protected under federal law. The community center is committed to accessibility for all residents." Blackwood smiled thinly. "Of course, Doctor. I'm merely suggesting that as the town evolves, so might its policies. Progress often requires adjustments." Marcus felt a familiar heat building in his chest, the same rage that had sometimes overwhelmed him after his injury. Sentinel, sensing the shift in his emotional state, pressed against the wheelchair, a silent reminder of his presence and support. "Sentinel stays with me," Marcus said firmly. That's non-negotiable. Everything is negotiable, Hayes, Blackwood replied, his smile not reaching his eyes. That's business. He checked his watch. Doctor, shall we continue our tour? We have a lunch meeting with the mayor at 1. Dr. Chen looked apologetically at Marcus. I'll see you Wednesday for our first session. Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak further. As Blackwood and his associate followed Dr. Chen out, Marcus remained by the pool, trying to process the interaction. It wasn't just about Sentinel anymore. The Blackwoods seemed to represent a threat to the life he had carefully rebuilt in Paradise Falls. Outside the community center, Marcus took a moment to collect himself before heading home. The mountain air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of an afternoon storm. Sentinel waited patiently as Marcus stared at the distant peaks, finding calm in their unchanging presence. "What do you think, boy?" Marcus asked quietly. "Should we let people like the Blackwoods dictate how we live our lives?" Sentinel's ears perked forward, his intelligent eyes fixed on Marcus as if he understood every word. The drive home was quiet, both man and dog lost in their own thoughts. The encounter with the Blackwoods had stirred something in Marcus that he had been carefully keeping at bay, a fighter's instinct that had once served him well in combat, but had less obvious applications in civilian life. Back at the cabin, Marcus busied himself putting away groceries and preparing lunch. Routine helped when his thoughts threatened to spiral. Sentinel, now off duty with his vest removed, stayed close, occasionally bringing Marcus a toy as if trying to lighten his mood. After lunch, Marcus wheeled himself onto the porch, Sentinel following to settle at his feet. The approaching storm painted the sky in dramatic shades of gray and purple. From this vantage point, Marcus could see most of Paradise Falls nestled in the valley below. It was still largely unchanged from when his grandfather had lived here, a small, tight-knit community where people looked out for each other. But change was coming. The Blackwood Development Project was just the beginning. Marcus had seen it happen in other small towns, wealthy outsiders moving in, driving up property values, and gradually pushing out the original residents who could no longer afford to stay. His phone buzzed with a text from Tom Garrison. "Hey Marcus, sorry about what happened at the store today. Some of us are meeting at the outpost tonight to discuss the Blackwood situation. Thought you might want to join." Marcus stared at the message, surprised by the invitation. He rarely participated in town affairs, preferring his solitude. But something about the Blackwoods' casual dismissal of his rights struck a chord that resonated beyond his personal situation. Thunder rumbled in the distance as the storm approached. Sentinel raised his head, alert but unafraid. The dog had never shown fear during storms, not even during the violent thunderstorms that sometimes shook the mountains. In Afghanistan, Sentinel had remained steady through mortar fire and explosions. A simple thunderstorm wasn't going to rattle him. "What do you think, Sentinel?" Marcus asked, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Should we get involved?" Sentinel leaned into the touch, his amber eyes meeting Marcus's gaze with what seemed like encouragement. Marcus texted back, "What time?" As the first raindrops began to fall, Marcus felt a resolve forming within him. The Blackwoods might have money and influence, but he had something they could never buy: the unshakable bond with the extraordinary dog at his side, and the resilience forged through fire and loss. Little did the Blackwoods know who they were really dealing with. Marcus Hayes and Sentinel weren't just a disabled veteran and his service dog. They were a team that had faced death together in the dust and danger of Afghanistan, and neither of them had ever backed down from a fight worth fighting. The outpost was Paradise Falls' oldest establishment, a rustic tavern that had served the community since the mining days. Its wooden beams and stone fireplace gave it an authentic charm that no corporate chain could replicate. Marcus hadn't been there in months, preferring to avoid crowded places where navigating his wheelchair became an exercise in frustration. As he pulled into the parking lot, He noted with approval that the owner had recently added a proper ramp alongside the original steps. Small changes like this made a world of difference to someone in his situation. He transferred into his wheelchair with practiced efficiency, Sentinel jumping down to assume his position. "Back to work, boy," Marcus said quietly, securing the service vest. Sentinel's demeanor shifted instantly, his relaxed posture transforming into alert vigilance. The tavern was busier than Marcus expected for a Monday evening. Heads turned as he entered, but the glances were friendly, welcoming rather than curious or pitying. Tom Garrison waved from a large table in the corner where about a dozen townspeople were gathered. "Marcus, glad you could make it," Tom called, making space at the table. "We were just getting started." Marcus wheeled over, nodding greetings to familiar faces. Mayor Eleanor Diaz was there, along with Sean Patel, who owned the hardware store, Maggie Chen, Dr. Chen's mother, who ran the local diner, and several other business owners and longtime residents. "Sorry about the crowd," Tom said as Marcus positioned his wheelchair at the table. "Word got out about the meeting." "It's fine," Marcus replied, though he felt a familiar tension in his shoulders. Sentinel settled beside him, maintaining a watchful position. Mayor Diaz, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who had served Paradise Falls for 3 terms, took charge of the meeting. "Folks, we're here to discuss the Blackwood development situation. Things are moving faster than anticipated and not necessarily in the direction we'd hoped." She laid out what had happened in recent weeks. Richard Blackwood had begun purchasing additional properties beyond the old mill site, including 3 historic buildings on Main Street. There were rumors of plans for high-end boutiques, a spa, and luxury condominiums. "The town council is divided," Mayor Diaz explained. "Some see the development as economic progress. Others worry about Paradise Falls losing its character and longtime residents being priced out." "They're already acting like they own the town," Maggie Chen added, her normally cheerful face creased with worry. "Richard Blackwood came into the diner yesterday and suggested I update my menu to appeal to a more discerning clientele. My family has been serving the same recipes for 40 years. Murmurs of discontent rippled through the group. Marcus listened, observing the dynamics. This wasn't just about the Blackwoods' attitude toward him and Sentinel. It was about the soul of Paradise Falls itself. "What about the zoning laws?" Sean Patel asked. "Don't they protect the historic district?" Mayor Diaz sighed. "Blackwood has hired a team of lawyers to find loopholes, and he's been courting certain council members quite aggressively with promises of economic growth and increased tax revenue." Marcus felt someone watching him and turned to find Tom Garrison looking at him expectantly. "Marcus, why don't you share what happened today?" All eyes turned to him. Marcus wasn't used to being the center of attention, but he recognized the importance of speaking up. He recounted both encounters with the Blackwoods, trying to stick to the facts without emotional coloring. "Mrs. Blackwood seemed to think that service dogs are optional," he concluded. "And her husband implied that as the town evolves, certain accommodations, like my service dog, might need to be reconsidered." "That's outrageous," Maggie exclaimed, "and illegal." "It's more than that," Marcus said, finding his voice growing stronger. "It's about who gets to belong here. The Blackwoods see Paradise Falls as a blank canvas for their vision, not a community with its own history and character." Mayor Diaz nodded thoughtfully. "The council meeting on Thursday will be crucial. Blackwood is presenting his expanded development plan, and I expect he'll have quite a showing of support from those who stand to profit." "Then we need to be there too," Tom said firmly. "Show the council that the community has concerns that can't be brushed aside." As the discussion continued, strategies were formed for the upcoming meeting. Marcus found himself unexpectedly engaged, offering perspectives on accessibility and community preservation that others hadn't considered. Sentinel remained a steady presence at his side, occasionally scanning the room, but mainly staying focused on Marcus. Nearly 2 hours later, as the meeting wound down, Marcus felt a surprising sense of connection. For the first time since moving to Paradise Falls, he wasn't just an observer of the community but an active participant. "Marcus," Mayor Diaz approached as people began to disperse, "would you be willing to speak at the council meeting? Your perspective as both a veteran and someone who depends on accessibility accommodations would be valuable." The request caught him off guard. Public speaking wasn't something he sought out, especially about personal matters. But the mayor's expression was earnest, and Marcus understood the stakes. "I'll be there," he promised. "Sentinel and I both will." Outside, the night air had turned cool, the earlier storm having cleared to reveal a sky full of stars. Marcus took a moment to appreciate the view before heading to his truck. Paradise Falls was special, worth fighting for. "Marcus?" a voice called from behind him. He turned to see Dr. Chen approaching, her expression apologetic. "I didn't get a chance to say this earlier, but I'm sorry about what happened with Blackwood at the center. I should have shut him down more firmly." "You were in a difficult position," Marcus acknowledged. "He's a major donor for the new wing." "Still," she insisted, "patient dignity comes first. Always." She hesitated, then added, "I wanted to let you know that I'll be at the council meeting too. The community center should be a place for everyone, not just those the Blackwoods deem appropriate." Marcus appreciated her directness. "Thank you. It means a lot." As she turned to leave, Dr. Chen paused. "Your dog, Sentinel. He's not just any service dog, is he?" The question caught Marcus by surprise. "What makes you say that?" "The way he carries himself, the specialized patches on his vest, and honestly, the way he watches everything, assesses threats. I've worked with enough veterans to recognize a military working dog when I see one." Marcus studied her for a moment before responding. "Sentinel was a multi-purpose canine with my Special Forces unit. IED detection, patrol, apprehension, one of the best." Dr. Chen nodded, seeming to process this information. "That explains a lot. Well, good night, Marcus. See you Wednesday." On the drive home, Marcus found himself thinking about Sentinel's journey. The German Shepherd had come to him as a young dog, already showing remarkable aptitude for military work. They had trained together, deployed together, saved each other's lives more times than Marcus could count. When the IED exploded, Sentinel had been far enough away to escape serious injury, but close enough to drag Marcus to safety, likely saving his life. The military had been prepared to reassign Sentinel to another handler, but Marcus's commanding officer had seen how the dog refused to leave his side in the hospital. Arrangements were made, additional training provided, and Sentinel transitioned from a weapon of war to a lifeline of support. Few people in Paradise Falls knew the full extent of Sentinel's capabilities. Most saw a well-behaved service dog, not realizing that beneath the calm exterior lay training so extensive it had cost the military over $60,000. Sentinel could still detect explosives, take down an armed attacker, follow complex commands in multiple languages, and perform dozens of specialized tasks that went far beyond typical service dog training. The Blackwoods had no idea who they were dismissing so casually. Sentinel wasn't just a companion animal. He was a highly trained military asset with skills that civilians could barely comprehend. Back at the cabin, Marcus prepared for bed with a mind more active than it had been in months. The town meeting had awakened something in him, a sense of purpose, a willingness to engage rather than withdraw. As he transferred from his wheelchair to the bed, Sentinel waited patiently before jumping up to settle in his usual spot. "Big day Thursday," Marcus told him, running a hand along the dog's sleek coat. "Think we're ready to get back in the fight?" Sentinel's alert posture and direct gaze seemed to say, "We've always been ready." As Marcus drifted toward sleep, he realized that for the first time in years, he was looking forward to tomorrow. The Blackwoods had inadvertently sparked something that had been dormant inside him, the warrior spirit that no injury could extinguish. Wednesday arrived with a clarity that seemed to mirror Marcus's newfound resolve. His water therapy session with Dr. Chen was scheduled for 10 a.m., and he found himself actually looking forward to it. The morning routine went smoothly: coffee on the porch with Sentinel, a protein-rich breakfast, and a quick check of his speaking notes for tomorrow's council meeting. The community center was quieter than it had been on Monday. Dr. Chen met him at the entrance, clipboard in hand and a warm smile on her face. "Ready for your first session?" she asked, leading the way to the pool area. "As ready as I'll ever be," Marcus replied. Sentinel padded alongside his wheelchair, vest firmly in place. The therapy pool was separate from the main swimming area, designed specifically for rehabilitation. The water was warmer, the depth adjustable, and specialized equipment lined the edges. "We'll start slow today," Dr. Chen explained. "Assess your mobility in the water, identify pain points, and establish a baseline." Marcus nodded, appreciating her professional approach. Some therapists he'd worked with in the past had treated him with kid gloves, as if his mental state was as fragile as his injured body had been. "Is there a place for Sentinel?" he asked, looking around the pool area. "Already arranged," Dr. Chen replied, pointing to a comfortable mat positioned where Sentinel would have a clear view of the pool. "He can watch from there, unless you'd prefer he wait outside." "No, he stays where he can see me," Marcus said. After years together, both of them were uncomfortable when separated. Marcus used the pool lift to enter the water, a necessary accommodation he'd learned to accept without embarrassment. Once in the heated water, supported by a specialized flotation device, he felt the familiar lightness that water therapy provided, a temporary reprieve from the constraints of his wheelchair. Dr. Chen was thorough and knowledgeable, guiding him through a series of gentle movements designed to maintain muscle tone and improve circulation in his residual limbs. Throughout the session, Marcus was aware of Sentinel's attentive gaze from his position by the pool's edge. "You've maintained excellent upper body strength," Dr. Chen noted as she supported him through a rotation exercise. "That's going to serve you well as we progress." "Had to," Marcus replied. "Independence depends on it." They worked for nearly an hour, Dr. Chen making notes about his range of motion and response to different exercises. By the end, Marcus felt the good kind of tired, the satisfaction of having pushed his body appropriately rather than the grinding exhaustion of overexertion. As Dr. Chen helped him back to the pool lift, Marcus found himself sharing more than he'd intended. "This is the first time I've used a pool since before Afghanistan," he admitted. "Water was always a rare luxury over there, mostly used baby wipes and dreamed about real showers." Dr. Chen smiled understandingly. "Water is healing in so many ways. I've worked with veterans who found that hydrotherapy helped not just physically, but mentally, something about the sensation of being held by the water." Once out of the pool and back in his wheelchair, Marcus felt strangely energized. Sentinel immediately returned to his side, alert and ready. "Same time Friday?" Dr. Chen asked, handing him a towel. "Wouldn't miss it," Marcus confirmed. As they were preparing to leave, the pool area door opened, and Richard Blackwood entered with an entourage that included 2 men in expensive suits, and, to Marcus's surprise, Mrs. Blackwood. Unlike her husband, who at least maintained a veneer of civility, Victoria Blackwood made no attempt to hide her displeasure at seeing Marcus and Sentinel. "Dr. Chen," Richard called, his voice echoing in the pool area. "Sorry to interrupt again. We're finalizing the plans for the therapeutic wing and wanted to see the existing facilities once more." "Of course," Dr. Chen replied professionally, though Marcus noticed her stance shift slightly. more guarded, less welcoming. Victoria Blackwood's gaze fixed on Sentinel, her lips pursing in disapproval. That dog is in a pool area? Surely that violates health codes. Before Dr. Chen could respond, Marcus spoke up. Sentinel is a service dog, Mrs. Blackwood. He's legally permitted to be anywhere I am. Yes, you mentioned that at the grocery store, Victoria said dismissively. But a pool has special hygiene requirements. Richard, didn't you say the new wing would have stricter policies? Richard Blackwood maintained his businessman's smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. We're looking at best practices from exclusive facilities around the country. Many have designated areas for service animals that allow them to remain nearby without compromising sanitation. Separate but equal? Marcus asked, unable to keep the edge from his voice. That sounds familiar. One of the suited men cleared his throat uncomfortably, but Blackwood's expression hardened. It's about standards, Hayes. The kind of clientele we're hoping to attract to Paradise Falls expects certain amenities and protocols. The kind that doesn't include disabled veterans? Marcus challenged. Dr. Chen stepped forward. Mr. Blackwood, while we appreciate your investment in the new wing, I should remind you that the community center serves all residents of Paradise Falls. Our policies comply with federal accessibility laws, including those regarding service animals. Victoria Blackwood made a small, derisive sound. Laws can be interpreted in different ways, and local ordinances can be quite specific. The implication was clear. The Blackwoods intended to use their influence to reshape the town's policies to suit their vision, regardless of existing protections. I believe we're done for today, Marcus said, nodding to Dr. Chen. Thank you for the session. As he wheeled toward the exit, Sentinel perfectly positioned beside him, Victoria Blackwood took a deliberate step back as if avoiding contamination. The gesture wasn't lost on Marcus, but he kept his expression neutral as he passed. Just as he reached the door, Richard Blackwood called after him. Hayes, I understand you're speaking at the council meeting tomorrow. Marcus turned. That's right. I'd reconsider if I were you, Blackwood said, his tone conversational but his meaning unmistakable. Small towns run on relationships. You wouldn't want to position yourself against progress. Is that a threat, Blackwood? Just friendly advice, Richard replied with that same empty smile. Progress happens with or without individual approval. Better to be on the right side of it. Marcus held the man's gaze for a long moment. I'll keep that in mind. Outside, the mountain air helped clear Marcus's head. Sentinel seemed tense beside him, picking up on his handler's mood. As they reached the truck, Marcus noticed Dr. Chen hurrying after them. Marcus, wait, she called. When she caught up, her expression was troubled. I want you to know that regardless of what the Blackwoods say, your therapy sessions are secure. The current board won't allow discriminatory policies. The current board, Marcus repeated. You think that might change? Dr. Chen's hesitation was answer enough. Blackwood has been meeting with individual board members. Nothing official, just getting to know the community. But there are rumors of promises being made, funding, connections, opportunities. Marcus wasn't surprised. He'd seen similar tactics in other contexts: divide and conquer, isolate potential opposition, create dependencies that could be leveraged later. Thank you for telling me, he said, and for standing up in there. Dr. Chen smiled, though worry still creased her brow. You're not the only one concerned about what the Blackwoods represent for Paradise Falls. Many of us moved here specifically to escape the kind of homogenized, exclusive communities they're trying to create. As she turned to go back inside, Dr. Chen added, by the way, Sentinel was perfect in there. The way he stayed alert but calm, even when provoked, that's exceptional training. Marcus watched her go, thinking about the layers of meaning in the confrontation they'd just experienced. The Blackwood's vision for Paradise Falls clearly had no place for people like him, or at least not in visible roles. Their ideal was a sanitized version of mountain living, where wealth created bubbles of exclusivity and the messier aspects of real life were kept at a distance. The drive home was quiet, Marcus processing what had happened. Sentinel seemed to sense his need for silence, simply providing his steady presence without demanding attention. Back at the cabin, Marcus transferred a load of laundry to the dryer before settling at his desk to finalize his notes for tomorrow's council meeting. The encounter with the Blackwoods had only strengthened his resolve to speak out. His phone buzzed with a text from Tom Garrison. Heard about what happened at the center. Blackwoods playing hardball. Still good for tomorrow? Marcus typed back, more determined than ever. As evening fell, he took Sentinel for a walk along the property's edge. The German Shepherd moved joyfully once his vest was removed, bounding ahead to investigate interesting scents before circling back to check on Marcus. These moments, when Sentinel could simply be a dog rather than a service animal, were precious to both of them. Tomorrow would be a battle of sorts, Marcus reflected, as he watched Sentinel chase a squirrel up a tree. Not the kind they'd faced in Afghanistan, with bullets and bombs, but a fight nonetheless, for inclusion, for community, for the soul of Paradise Falls. Thursday evening arrived with an electric anticipation in the air. The Paradise Falls Town Hall, a historic stone building dating back to the 1920s, was more crowded than Marcus had ever seen it. Cars filled the small parking lot and lined the adjacent streets. As Marcus maneuvered his wheelchair up the accessibility ramp, he noted the diverse turnout: longtime residents, business owners, families, and a surprising number of younger people who typically avoided local politics. Inside, the council chamber buzzed with conversation. Tom Garrison waved Marcus over to where a group of community members had saved spaces, including an accessible spot for his wheelchair. Sentinel moved efficiently beside him, navigating the crowded room with practiced ease. Quite a turnout, Marcus observed as he positioned himself in the reserved space. Word got around, Tom replied. The Blackwoods have their supporters, but there's more opposition than they expected. Marcus scanned the room, noting Richard and Victoria Blackwood seated in the front row, surrounded by what appeared to be business associates and lawyers. Victoria caught his eye momentarily, her expression souring as she noticed Sentinel before quickly looking away. Mayor Diaz called the meeting to order precisely at 7 p.m., her gavel bringing the murmuring crowd to attention. Good evening, everyone. It's encouraging to see such civic engagement tonight. She outlined the agenda, noting that public comments would follow the Blackwood development presentation. Richard Blackwood took the floor with the confident air of someone accustomed to commanding attention. His presentation was slick and professional, complete with architectural renderings and economic projections displayed on large screens. The vision he outlined was undeniably attractive on the surface. The revitalization of the old mill into luxury condominiums, boutique shops along Main Street, a high-end spa and wellness center, and walking paths connecting it all. Paradise Falls has untapped potential, Blackwood concluded, his voice resonating through the chamber. Our investment will create jobs, increase property values, and put this town on the map as a premier mountain destination. Progress is inevitable. We're simply offering to guide it in a direction that benefits everyone. Mayor Diaz thanked him for the presentation before opening the floor for public comments. We'll alternate between those in favor and those with concerns, she announced. Please keep your remarks to 3 minutes. Several business owners spoke in support of the development, citing potential economic benefits. Then Tom Garrison took the microphone, articulating concerns about maintaining the town's character and affordability. The pattern continued, with opinions clearly divided. When Marcus's turn came, he wheeled himself to the designated speaking area, Sentinel perfectly positioned beside him. He felt the weight of all eyes in the room, including the Blackwood's scrutinizing gaze. "My name is Marcus Hayes," he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I'm a former Green Beret and current resident of Paradise Falls. This is Sentinel, my service dog and former military working dog who served with me in Afghanistan." He paused, making eye contact with various council members before continuing. "I came to Paradise Falls seeking healing after losing my legs to an IED. What I found here was more than just a quiet place to recover. I found a community where diversity of experience is valued, where accessibility is a priority rather than an afterthought, and where people judge you by your character rather than your capabilities." Marcus shifted slightly, ensuring his posture conveyed strength despite his seated position. "The development proposed by the Blackwoods threatens that community spirit, not because development itself is wrong, but because this particular vision seems to prioritize exclusivity over inclusivity." He recounted his experiences with the Blackwoods, carefully sticking to verifiable facts rather than emotional interpretations. "When Mrs. Blackwood suggested that my service dog shouldn't be allowed in public spaces, and when Mr. Blackwood implied that certain accommodations might need to be reconsidered as the town evolves, they revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of both federal law and basic human dignity." Victoria Blackwood shifted uncomfortably in her seat, whispering something to her husband who maintained his composed facade. "Progress isn't about creating exclusive enclaves that push out those who don't fit a certain image," Marcus continued. "True progress expands accessibility, celebrates diversity, and strengthens community bonds rather than fragmenting them into economic tiers." He concluded by addressing the council directly. "I urge you to consider what kind of town you want Paradise Falls to be, one that values all its citizens or one that caters primarily to wealth and status. Development can happen without displacement. Growth can occur without losing our soul. Thank you." The room erupted in applause as Marcus wheeled back to his place. Sentinel remained steadfast beside him, unperturbed by the noise. From across the room, Marcus caught Dr. Chen's eye. She nodded in approval, a small smile playing at her lips. Several more speakers followed, including Maggie Chen, who passionately defended the town's small businesses, and Sean Patel, who questioned the environmental impact of the proposed development. Dr. Chen spoke about the importance of maintaining accessible community services for all residents. When the public comment period ended, Richard Blackwood requested an opportunity to respond. Mayor Diaz granted him 2 minutes. "I appreciate everyone's passionate involvement tonight," Blackwood began, his voice smooth and practiced. "But I must address some misconceptions. Our development plans absolutely include accessibility features that meet or exceed federal requirements. As for concerns about exclusivity, this is simply about raising standards, not excluding anyone who wishes to participate in the community's growth." His gaze found Marcus briefly before continuing. "Regarding the alleged comments about service animals, if there was any misunderstanding, I apologize. Blackwood Development fully respects ADA regulations." The non-apology wasn't lost on Marcus or many others in the room. Blackwood was backpedaling publicly while essentially admitting nothing. "Change can be intimidating," Blackwood concluded, "but I assure you, our vision for Paradise Falls will enhance what makes this town special while creating opportunities that currently don't exist. We're offering progress, prosperity, and prestige, a future we can all be proud of." Mayor Diaz thanked everyone for their participation before the council moved into deliberation. As the formal part of the meeting concluded, people broke into animated discussion groups. Marcus found himself surrounded by supportive community members, many thanking him for speaking out. "You articulated exactly what many of us have been feeling," an elderly woman told him, resting a weathered hand briefly on his shoulder. Tom Garrison looked pleased. "That went better than expected. Did you see Victoria Blackwood's face when you mentioned her comments about Sentinel? Marcus nodded, though he took no particular pleasure in embarrassing her. His goal had been to highlight the underlying attitudes, not to score personal points. Across the room, Richard Blackwood was engaged in intense conversation with two council members. His expression remained confident, but there was a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been there before. Dr. Chen approached, waiting until the others had moved away before speaking. "Powerful testimony," she said, "especially coming from you." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. "You've kept to yourself since moving here," she replied. "When someone who typically stays out of the spotlight chooses to speak up, people listen more carefully." Before Marcus could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. A tall man in an expensive suit was arguing with the security guard, gesturing emphatically toward the chamber. After a moment, the guard reluctantly allowed him to enter. "Who's that?" Marcus asked, noticing how Richard Blackwood immediately moved to intercept the newcomer. Tom Garrison had returned and overheard the question. "That's James Blackwood, Richard's brother and business partner. Usually stays in the background. Not good news that he's here." The brothers conferred briefly before approaching Victoria, who seemed surprised by James's presence. The three huddled together, occasionally glancing toward Marcus and the other community members who had spoken against the development. "I don't like this," Tom murmured. "James has a reputation for being the fixer when Richard's projects face opposition." Marcus watched the Blackwood trio, noting their body language and the intensity of their discussion. Sentinel sensed his unease, pressing closer to the wheelchair, his alert gaze fixed on the newcomers. Something told Marcus that tonight's meeting, while a temporary victory for the community, was merely the opening skirmish in what would become a much larger battle, and the Blackwoods, now facing unexpected resistance, were unlikely to retreat so easily. The days following the town hall meeting brought a deceptive calm to Paradise Falls. Marcus continued his therapy sessions with Dr. Chen, finding unexpected satisfaction in the water exercises that allowed him a freedom of movement his wheelchair couldn't provide. Sentinel remained a constant presence, his alertness never wavering despite the routine nature of their visits. "Your core strength is improving already," Dr. Chen noted during Friday's session. "How's the pain level?" "Better," Marcus admitted, "especially in the evenings." He didn't mention the nightmare that had woken him the previous night, a familiar one where the explosion replayed in slow motion, except this time it was Paradise Falls that erupted in flames while the Blackwoods watched from a safe distance. He'd woken drenched in sweat, Sentinel already alert and pressing against him, offering the grounding pressure that helped bring Marcus back to reality. After the session, Dr. Chen hesitated before saying, "Have you heard the latest?" Marcus shook his head, toweling off his hair. "The council decided to postpone voting on the Blackwood proposal pending an extended community impact study. It's a temporary victory, but Richard Blackwood was furious." "And his brother, James?" Dr. Chen's expression darkened. "He's still in town, been making the rounds, having private meetings with business owners and council members. The rumor is they're recalibrating their strategy." As Marcus wheeled through the community center lobby, he noticed several unfamiliar men in suits speaking with the director, their body language suggesting an intense discussion. One glanced his way, eyes lingering on Sentinel before returning to the conversation. Outside, the October air carried the crisp scent of autumn. Leaves had begun to turn, painting the mountains in vibrant oranges and reds. Marcus breathed deeply, trying to shake off the unsettled feeling that had been growing since the town meeting. His phone buzzed, a text from Tom Garrison. "Meeting at the outpost tonight, 8 p.m., important updates." Marcus texted back his confirmation before heading home. The day had warmed considerably, so he took a detour through the town park, allowing Sentinel a chance to stretch his legs while still on duty. The park was busy with families enjoying the pleasant weather. Children played on the recently renovated playground equipment, their laughter carrying across the open space. Marcus found a spot near a chess table where older residents regularly gathered for games and conversation. He was about to message Tom for more details when he noticed Victoria Blackwood approaching with another woman. Both were dressed in designer workout clothes, appearing to have just finished a jog. Victoria spotted him at the same moment, her step faltering briefly before she straightened her shoulders and continued forward. Marcus steeled himself for another confrontation, but to his surprise, Victoria forced a smile as she drew near. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice overly pleasant. "Enjoying the lovely day?" The abrupt shift from her previous hostility put Marcus on guard. "Mrs. Blackwood," he acknowledged with a nod. "This is my friend Caroline Bennett," Victoria introduced her companion. "She's considering investing in Paradise Falls." Caroline offered a manicured hand, which Marcus shook briefly. "Victoria's told me so much about this charming town," she said, her accent suggesting East Coast old money. "Such untapped potential." "It's already pretty great as is," Marcus replied evenly. Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Oh, we certainly think so. That's why we want to preserve its special character while enhancing its appeal." Marcus noticed how she emphasized preserving the town's character, a distinct pivot from her husband's previous rhetoric about transformation and progress. "I understand you spoke quite passionately at the town meeting," Caroline commented, studying him with undisguised curiosity. "Victoria mentioned you're a veteran." "Yes," Marcus confirmed, keeping his response deliberately brief. "So brave," Caroline murmured, her gaze shifting to his wheelchair and then to Sentinel. "And is this your therapy dog?" "Service dog," Marcus corrected firmly. "Sentinel assists me with mobility and daily tasks." "Of course," Victoria interjected hastily, "and we absolutely support accommodations for service animals. Any suggestion otherwise was a misunderstanding." The backpedaling was so transparent that Marcus almost laughed. Instead, he maintained a neutral expression. "Is that so?" Victoria shifted strategies, her voice lowering conspiratorially. "Actually, Mr. Hayes, Richard and I were hoping to have a word with you privately. Perhaps over dinner at the lodge. We feel there's been some unfortunate miscommunication." The invitation caught Marcus off guard. The Blackwoods were clearly recalibrating after the public pushback, but what was their angle? "I appreciate the offer," he replied carefully, "but I have plans this evening." Victoria's smile didn't waver, though her eyes hardened slightly. "Another time, then. We're very interested in hearing your perspective on making Paradise Falls more accessible for everyone. Richard especially values input from people with unique needs." The condescension beneath her veneer of concern was palpable. Marcus had encountered this type of attitude throughout his recovery. People who viewed his disability as his defining characteristic, who spoke about special needs rather than basic rights. Paradise Falls was already doing a good job with accessibility before your arrival, he pointed out. The community center, the library, the park, all have been upgraded in recent years through local initiatives. "Yes, but there's always room for improvement," Caroline chimed in. "Victoria mentioned some of the sidewalks downtown are quite uneven, and surely more businesses could benefit from proper ramps and facilities." Marcus couldn't argue with that. There were indeed accessibility gaps in town, but something about their sudden concern for the issue struck him as calculated rather than genuine. "I'm sure the town council would welcome funding for such improvements," he said neutrally. "Independent of any development approvals, of course." Victoria's composure flickered momentarily. "Of course," she echoed, checking her designer watch. "Well, we should continue our walk. Do consider the dinner invitation, Mr. Hayes." Richard and James would both value the opportunity to clear the air. As the women walked away, Marcus overheard Caroline say, "He's more articulate than you described," to which Victoria replied something too low to catch. Sentinel, who had remained perfectly still throughout the exchange, now looked up at Marcus with what seemed like concern in his intelligent eyes. "Yeah, I don't trust them either, boy," Marcus murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears. The encounter had left him with a growing certainty that the Blackwoods were regrouping, not retreating. That evening, the outpost was less crowded than during the pre-council meeting, but the mood was no less serious. Tom Garrison, Mayor Diaz, and about a dozen other community members were gathered at the same corner table. Sean Patel was speaking as Marcus arrived. "Approached me yesterday with an offer to buy my hardware store at twice its market value," Sean was saying, his expression troubled. "When I declined, he suggested that the development would include a modern home improvement center that would, unfortunately, make businesses like mine obsolete." "Classic divide-and-conquer tactics," Mayor Diaz observed grimly. "They're targeting individual business owners with offers too good to refuse, or thinly veiled threats if they don't sell." Marcus positioned his wheelchair at the table as Tom acknowledged his arrival with a nod. "Marcus, glad you made it. Things are escalating faster than we anticipated." Mayor Diaz quickly brought him up to speed. In just the few days since the council meeting, the Blackwoods had made moves on multiple fronts, approaching business owners with buyout offers, meeting privately with council members, bringing in potential investors like Caroline Bennett to tour the town, and hiring a PR firm to launch a Paradise Falls Future campaign promoting their vision. "They're also suddenly very concerned about accessibility," Marcus added, recounting his encounter with Victoria and Caroline in the park. "That's new," Mayor Diaz remarked skeptically. "Their original plans barely met minimum ADA requirements. Now they're champions of accessibility." "It's a response to your testimony," Tom suggested to Marcus. "They're trying to neutralize your criticism by co-opting your concerns." "Or trying to bring me to their side," Marcus said. "Victoria invited me to dinner with Richard and James to clear the air." "Don't go alone if you go at all," Mayor Diaz advised. "James Blackwood has a reputation for finding leverage on opponents. Information, secrets, vulnerabilities, anything he can use." The meeting continued with updates from others. Maggie Chen reported that a health inspector had suddenly appeared at her diner, citing minor violations that had been overlooked for years. Dr. Chen mentioned rumors that the Blackwoods were considering building their own private wellness center instead of donating to the community center expansion. As the gathering wound down, Marcus found himself sitting alone with Tom, who looked more worried than Marcus had ever seen him. "This fight is getting uglier than I expected," Tom admitted. "The Blackwoods don't just want to build here, they want to own Paradise Falls, reshape it in their image." "They can't buy everyone," Marcus pointed out. Tom's expression was grim. "They don't need to. Just enough key properties and enough council votes, the rest will follow once momentum builds." As Marcus left the outpost, he couldn't shake the feeling that Paradise Falls stood at a tipping point. The calm after the council meeting hadn't been a victory, merely the drawing of battle lines for a more sophisticated campaign. Sentinel seemed to sense his unease, staying particularly alert on the drive home, his gaze scanning the darkened road as if expecting trouble. Marcus realized the German Shepherd hadn't fully relaxed in days, as if some remnant of his military training had reactivated in response to the emerging threat. Back at the cabin, Marcus checked the locks twice before finally preparing for bed, a habit from his deployment days that had resurfaced recently. As he transferred from his wheelchair, he found himself thinking about the Blackwoods' dinner invitation and what it might reveal about their revised strategy. Perhaps it was time to understand exactly what he was up against, to venture into the lion's den and see what the Blackwoods were really planning for Paradise Falls. The lodge at Paradise Falls sat on a bluff overlooking the town, a rustic, luxurious retreat that had once been a hunting lodge for wealthy visitors in the 1920s. Now renovated with all modern amenities while preserving its historic charm, it was exactly the kind of established local business the Blackwoods might appreciate, exclusive without being ostentatious, refined, yet authentically mountain-styled. Marcus had called Victoria the next morning to accept her dinner invitation, partly out of curiosity and partly from a strategic desire to understand the Blackwoods' revised approach. Tom had insisted on accompanying him, as backup, he'd said, and Marcus hadn't argued. Sentinel, of course, would be by his side. As they pulled into the lodge's circular driveway, Marcus noticed several high-end vehicles already parked near the entrance. The valet, a local teenager named Kyle, whom Marcus recognized from town, hurried over to assist. "Evening, Mr. Hayes," Kyle greeted him, looking slightly uncomfortable in his formal uniform. "They've got you set up in the private dining room." "Thanks, Kyle," Marcus replied, transferring into his wheelchair with practiced efficiency. Sentinel jumped down from the passenger side and immediately assumed his working position. The lodge's interior was all polished wood and stone, with a massive fireplace dominating the main lobby. Heads turned as Marcus wheeled in with Sentinel beside him, followed by Tom. The maitre d' approached with a professional smile. "Mr. Hayes, welcome. The Blackwood party is expecting you. Please follow me." They were led through the main dining area to a separate room at the back, more intimate and secluded than the main restaurant. Richard and Victoria Blackwood were already seated, along with James Blackwood and, to Marcus's surprise, Caroline Bennett from the park, and two men he didn't recognize. "Marcus, you made it." Richard rose to greet them, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "And you've brought company. Tom Garrison." Tom introduced himself with a firm handshake. "Thanks for extending the invitation." Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, but she recovered quickly. "Of course, the more perspectives, the better." As they settled at the table, the staff efficiently removing a chair to accommodate Marcus's wheelchair, Richard introduced the others. "You've met Carolyn, of course. This is William Drake, our head of development, and Michael Sawyer, our legal counsel." Marcus noted the strategic composition of their dinner party: 3 Blackwoods, an investor, and 2 professional advisors against himself, Tom and Sentinel. The power dynamics were intentional. "Let's order before we get down to business, shall we?" Richard suggested, signaling for the server. Throughout the appetizer course, conversation remained superficial. Comments about the lodge's excellent cuisine, the beautiful autumn weather, casual questions about how long Marcus and Tom had lived in Paradise Falls. It wasn't until the main course arrived that Richard finally shifted to the real purpose of the meeting. "Marcus, I want to address what happened at the town council meeting," he began, setting down his fork. "There seems to be a misconception about our intentions for Paradise Falls." "Is there?" Marcus asked neutrally. "Absolutely," Victoria interjected. "We're not trying to exclude anyone. Quite the opposite. We want to elevate the entire community." James Blackwood, who had been relatively quiet until now, leaned forward. Unlike his brother's polished charm, James had a more direct, almost predatory demeanor. "Let's be frank. You made some compelling points at the council meeting, especially regarding accessibility. We'd be fools not to take those concerns seriously." Marcus met his gaze steadily. "I appreciate that, but my concerns went beyond just physical accessibility." "That's precisely why we wanted to meet," Richard said smoothly. "We're revising our proposal to address community concerns, and we'd value your input, particularly on making Paradise Falls more accessible and veteran-friendly." Tom raised an eyebrow. "That's quite a pivot from your original position." "Not a pivot," the lawyer Sawyer corrected, "an evolution based on community feedback. That's how responsible development works." Caroline Bennett smiled warmly at Marcus. We're particularly interested in adding a veterans support center to the development plan. Your perspective would be invaluable in ensuring it meets real needs rather than just ticking boxes. Marcus kept his expression neutral, though internally his suspicions were growing. The Blackwoods were trying to co-opt him, to neutralize his opposition by seeming to embrace his concerns. That sounds admirable, he replied carefully. Though existing veteran services in the county are quite good, what specifically would this center offer that isn't already available? Richard and James exchanged glances before Richard answered. Specialized physical therapy, employment assistance, even housing subsidies for disabled veterans. We're prepared to make a significant investment. In exchange for what? Tom asked bluntly. William Drake, the development head, smiled thinly. We're hoping for Mr. Hayes's support, or at least neutrality regarding our revised proposal. And there it was, the quid pro quo laid bare. Marcus felt Sentinel shift slightly beside him, the dog sensing his tension despite his outwardly calm demeanor. I'm just one voice in the community, Marcus pointed out. Why focus so much on my opinion? James Blackwood's smile was calculating. Your testimony was particularly damaging because of who you are, Marcus. A wounded warrior speaking about inclusion and community. That resonates powerfully. If someone with your challenges supports our vision, it undermines accusations of elitism or exclusivity. The casual reference to his disability as challenges made Marcus's jaw tighten, but he kept his composure. So you want to use me as a shield against criticism? I'd call it a partnership, Richard countered smoothly. You have concerns about Paradise Falls' future. We have resources to address those concerns. Surely there's middle ground where everyone benefits. Tom shook his head. Including a veterans center doesn't address the fundamental issues with your development, pricing out locals, changing the town's character, creating an exclusive enclave. Victoria's pleasant facade slipped slightly. Progress always faces resistance from those who fear change. Paradise Falls can't remain frozen in time like some quaint museum piece. No one's arguing against all development, Marcus replied evenly. Just development that divides rather than unites the community. Caroline leaned forward, her diamond bracelet catching the light. Marcus, perhaps we could discuss specific accessibility improvements you'd like to see. Anything at all. Sky's the limit when you have the right backing. The blatant attempt to buy his support with promises of accessibility features, treating them as special favors rather than basic rights, ignited a slow burn of anger in Marcus's chest. Before he could respond, James Blackwood spoke again, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. I understand Sentinel is more than just a service dog. Former military working dog, wasn't he? Specialized training? The abrupt change of subject put Marcus on alert. That's right. James nodded thoughtfully. Impressive animals. I researched a bit after the council meeting. The training, the capabilities. Must have been quite an adjustment for him, going from combat operations to service work. Something in James's tone suggested this wasn't just casual interest. Marcus felt a prickle of unease. He adapted well, Marcus replied simply, one hand dropping to rest on Sentinel's head. The dog remained perfectly composed, though Marcus could feel the subtle tension in his body. I imagine the certification process for such dogs is quite rigorous, James continued, especially given their aggressive training background. And suddenly Marcus understood the implied threat. James was suggesting that Sentinel's military background could be used against him, perhaps questioning his certification as a service dog based on his previous tactical training. Sentinel's certification is impeccable, Marcus stated firmly. His military background makes him more disciplined and reliable, not less. Of course, James smiled, raising his wine glass. I'm merely expressing admiration, though I've heard some communities are implementing stricter local ordinances regarding service animals, public safety concerns, and all that. Tom bristled visibly. Federal law supersedes local ordinances when it comes to service animals. In theory, the lawyer Sawyer interjected smoothly, but legal challenges can be time-consuming and stressful. The threat was now unmistakable. If Marcus continued opposing their development, the Blackwoods were prepared to target Sentinel through legal challenges and local regulation, tying Marcus up in bureaucratic battles while simultaneously working to push their development forward. Marcus met James Blackwood's gaze directly. Interesting strategy. Threaten a disabled veteran service dog when he speaks against your plans. Threaten? James feigned shock. I'm simply making conversation about a fascinating subject. Let's all take a breath, Richard intervened, shooting his brother a warning look. No one is threatening anyone. We invited you here to find common ground, Marcus, not to create more division. But the damage was done. The Blackwoods had shown their hand. First the carrot of inclusion in their plans, then the stick of legal harassment if he refused to play along. Marcus placed his napkin on the table. I think we've found the limit of productive conversation for tonight. You're leaving? Victoria asked, her tone suggesting this was a breach of etiquette. We haven't even discussed the details of our revised proposal. Send it to the town council, Marcus replied, preparing to depart. They can evaluate it on its merits just like the original plan. As Marcus wheeled back from the table, Sentinel maintaining perfect position beside him, James Blackwood made one final comment. Consider carefully which side you choose, Hayes. Some battles aren't worth fighting, especially when you've already sacrificed so much. Marcus paused, turning back to meet James's gaze. That's where you're wrong, Blackwood. Some battles are absolutely worth fighting, especially when what's at stake matters to an entire community. The drive back from the lodge was tense, both Marcus and Tom processing what had just transpired. Sentinel sat alertly in the passenger seat, perhaps sensing his handler's agitation. They're playing hardball, Tom finally said, breaking the silence. Going after Sentinel, that's low, even for them. Marcus nodded, his jaw tight. It's a calculated move. They know he's essential to my independence. We should talk to Mayor Diaz first thing tomorrow. The council needs to know what kind of people they're dealing with. Back at his cabin, Marcus found himself too wired to sleep. The veiled threats against Sentinel had struck a nerve deeper than any personal attack could have. He wheeled onto the porch, the cool night air carrying the scent of pine and approaching winter. Sentinel followed, settling beside him with a soft whine that seemed to ask a question. We're okay, boy, Marcus assured him, running a hand along the dog's sleek coat. They're not going to separate us. Yet even as he spoke the words, a flicker of doubt crept in. The Blackwoods had resources, connections, and apparently few ethical boundaries. How far would they go to neutralize opposition to their plans? Morning brought a flurry of activity. Tom had already spoken to Mayor Diaz by the time Marcus arrived at the community center for his therapy session with Dr. Chen. The news of the Blackwoods' tactics was spreading rapidly through the town's informal communication network. I heard about last night, Dr. Chen said, as they began the session. Her usually calm demeanor was edged with anger. Threatening your service dog, that crosses a line. They were careful not to make direct threats, Marcus clarified, lowering himself into the therapy pool. Just implications about how complicated things could get. Dr. Chen's expression was grim as she guided him through his exercises. The board received a proposal this morning. The Blackwoods are offering to build a state-of-the-art rehabilitation center contingent on approval of their full development plan. Let me guess, with their own management team and policies? Exactly. They're presenting it as a generous community benefit, but it would effectively privatize services that are currently accessible to everyone. The pattern was becoming clear. Identify community needs or concerns, then offer solutions that seemed generous on the surface, but ultimately served the Blackwoods' vision of an exclusive Paradise Falls. After the therapy session, Marcus headed to the outpost where an impromptu community meeting was gathering. The cafe was packed, with every available chair occupied and people standing along the walls. Mayor Diaz was already there, along with most of the town council and dozens of concerned residents. As Marcus entered, conversation momentarily paused, then resumed with increased intensity. Tom waved him over to a spot they'd saved near the front. "It's getting complicated," Tom said by way of greeting. "The Blackwoods submitted their revised proposal this morning. They've included everything they mentioned last night: Veterans Center, accessibility upgrades, rehabilitation facility, plus affordable housing units and small business incubator spaces." Marcus frowned. "That sounds surprisingly positive." "On paper, yes, but the fine print tells a different story. The affordable housing would be limited to 10 units tucked away from the main development. The small business spaces would be subject to aesthetic guidelines that would price out most local entrepreneurs, and all of it contingent on full approval of their luxury condos and high-end retail spaces." Mayor Diaz called the meeting to order, her normally composed face showing signs of strain. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. As many of you have heard, Blackwood Development has submitted a revised proposal that appears to address many of the concerns raised at the council meeting." She outlined the new proposal, noting both its apparent concessions and its underlying issues. "The council will need time to review all details before voting, but I wanted to hear community perspectives first." The discussion that followed was heated, with opinions still divided. Several business owners seemed swayed by the promise of economic growth, while others remained deeply skeptical of the Blackwoods' intentions. Sean Patel stood to speak, his normally cheerful face serious. "The hardware store has been in my family for 3 generations. Yesterday I received notice that the building's owner, who lives in Denver and has never even visited the property, has accepted an offer from Blackwood Development. I have 30 days to vacate or negotiate a new lease at triple the current rate." A murmur of shock ran through the crowd. Sean wasn't the only one with a story. Maggie Chen reported that her diner had been cited for health code violations that had never been issues before. The owner of the local bookstore had received a similar buyout offer for her building. One by one, the pattern emerged. The Blackwoods were systematically acquiring control of Paradise Falls' commercial properties. Marcus listened, a cold anger building within him. This wasn't just about his service dog or even accessibility anymore. It was about the deliberate dismantling of a community. When his turn came to speak, Marcus wheeled to the front, sentinel by his side. The room quieted, people leaning forward to hear what he had to say. "Last night I had dinner with the Blackwoods," he began, recounting the meeting in detail, the initial offers, the pivot to veiled threats when he didn't immediately fall in line. "They're not interested in compromise. They want control, and they're willing to use whatever leverage they can find against those who stand in their way." "What can we even do against people like that?" someone called from the back. "They have money, lawyers, connections." "We have something stronger," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "Community, unity. The Blackwoods are counting on dividing us, picking us off one by one through individual pressures and incentives. If we stand together, their tactics won't work." Mayor Diaz nodded thoughtfully. "Marcus is right. We need a coordinated response." She turned to the town attorney who was present. "Dan, what legal options do we have to protect local businesses from predatory acquisitions?" "Limited," the attorney admitted. "Property owners have the right to sell to whom they choose, but we could potentially explore emergency zoning restrictions or historical preservation designations for certain properties. The meeting continued, strategies forming as the community rallied. By the end, a plan was taking shape. Legal research, media outreach, coordination with county officials, and a fund to help businesses facing sudden rent increases. As people began to disperse, James Blackwood appeared in the doorway of the outpost, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the gathering. The room gradually fell silent as people noticed his presence. "Don't stop on my account," James said, his voice carrying easily in the quiet room. "Public meetings are the backbone of democracy, after all." Marcus felt Sentinel tense beside him, the dog's gaze fixed on the newcomer. Mayor Diaz stepped forward, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the intrusion. "Mr. Blackwood, this was an informal community discussion. Is there something we can help you with?" James smiled thinly. "Just observing local governance in action. Fascinating process." His gaze swept the room before landing on Marcus. "Though I'm disappointed to hear mischaracterizations of private conversations being spread as fact." Marcus met his stare evenly. "Nothing I shared was inaccurate." "Perception is subjective," James replied smoothly, "especially when someone might have a personal agenda or grievance." The implication hung in the air, that Marcus was using his status as a disabled veteran to garner sympathy in opposition to the development. Sentinel let out a low, almost inaudible growl, so subtle that only Marcus noticed. He placed a calming hand on the dog's head, though he shared the sentiment. "Your brother presented your revised proposal as a partnership with the community," Marcus said, keeping his voice level. "Yet here you are, monitoring community meetings and intimidating local businesses. Those actions speak louder than any development plan." James's composed facade slipped momentarily, a flash of something cold and calculating crossing his features before the polished smile returned. "We're all passionate about Paradise Falls' future. Different visions, perhaps, but the same goal: progress. Progress isn't always measured in property values and profit margins," Tom interjected. "No," James agreed with false sincerity. "Sometimes it's measured in who ultimately prevails when competing interests clash. History is written by the victors, after all." He checked his watch casually. "Enjoy your meeting. I look forward to the council's decision on our proposal." As James turned to leave, he paused. "Oh, and Hayes, I've been researching service animal regulations quite thoroughly. Fascinating legal area. So many nuances." With that parting shot, he exited, leaving a charged atmosphere behind him. Mayor Diaz moved quickly to restore calm, but the message was clear. The Blackwoods were watching, listening, and prepared to escalate their pressure tactics. The battle for Paradise Falls was entering a new, more contentious phase, and Marcus found himself squarely in the crosshairs. 3 days after the community meeting, Marcus received an official-looking letter. The Paradise Falls Town Council letterhead seemed innocent enough, but the contents sent a chill through him. A notice about a proposed emergency ordinance regarding service animals in public spaces. The ordinance, scheduled for discussion at the upcoming council meeting, would require additional certification and registration for service animals, including temperament evaluations for any animal with prior training that could be considered aggressive in nature. The language was carefully crafted to seem reasonable on the surface while specifically targeting dogs like Sentinel. "They didn't waste any time," Marcus muttered to Sentinel, who sat watching him with those intelligent amber eyes. The German shepherd tilted his head slightly, as if asking a question. Marcus's phone rang, Tom Garrison calling. "Did you get it?" Tom asked without preamble. "Just reading it now," Marcus confirmed. "Targeted specifically at Sentinel." "It's not just you," Tom said, his voice tight with anger. "They've been busy. Sean Patel got served with a notice claiming his store doesn't meet updated fire code requirements. Maggie's Diner is facing another health inspection, and Dr. Chen called, the community center board is considering the Blackwoods' offer for a private rehabilitation facility. Marcus processed this barrage of information, recognizing the coordinated attack for what it was. They're applying pressure from all sides. Mayor Diaz is furious. 3 council members apparently met privately with Richard Blackwood yesterday without informing her. She thinks they may have the votes to pass both the service animal ordinance and an initial approval for their development plan. The pieces were falling into place. The Blackwoods hadn't been idle after the community meeting. They were executing a multi-pronged strategy to undermine opposition while advancing their agenda. "When's the council meeting?" Marcus asked, already knowing he would need to fight this. "Thursday evening. Mayor Diaz is trying to rally support, but people are getting nervous. The Blackwoods have made it clear they're willing to make life difficult for anyone who stands against them." After hanging up, Marcus wheeled himself onto the porch, needing fresh air to clear his head. Sentinel followed, settling beside the wheelchair in his customary spot. The mountains stood impassive in the distance, unchanging despite the human drama unfolding in their shadow. "What do you think, boy?" Marcus asked quietly. "Should we back down? Find somewhere else to live?" Sentinel looked up at him, and Marcus could almost imagine the dog's response. "We don't retreat. Not from bullies." The next morning brought another development. As Marcus arrived at the community center for his therapy session, he found Dr. Chen in an intense discussion with a woman in a business suit who carried a clipboard and an official-looking badge. "Marcus," Dr. Chen called when she spotted him, relief evident in her voice. "This is Ms. Harper from the County Health Department. She has some questions about service animals in therapeutic settings." Ms. Harper turned, her expression professionally neutral. "Mr. Hayes, I understand your service dog accompanies you during water therapy sessions." "That's correct," Marcus confirmed, already suspecting where this was heading. "Sentinel remains poolside, not in the water." She made a note on her clipboard. "We've received concerns about hygiene protocols, particularly regarding animals in proximity to therapeutic pools. I'll need to see all certification and vaccination records for your dog." "Concerns from whom?" Dr. Chen asked pointedly. "That information is confidential," Ms. Harper replied smoothly. "This is simply a routine follow-up." There was nothing routine about it, as all 3 of them well knew. The timing was too perfect, the focus too specific. The Blackwoods were making good on their threats, using regulatory channels to apply pressure. Marcus provided all the requested documentation. Sentinel certifications, vaccination records, and service dog registration were impeccable. Ms. Harper reviewed them with a slight frown, perhaps disappointed not to find any obvious deficiencies. "Everything appears to be in order," she admitted reluctantly. "However, given the specialized nature of this facility, we'll need to conduct a more thorough evaluation. Until then, the dog should remain outside the pool area." "That's not reasonable," Dr. Chen objected. "The service dog is necessary for Mr. Hayes' comfort and safety." "I can wait in the hallway during his sessions," Ms. Harper suggested, as if offering a generous compromise. "The dog can remain with me." Marcus shook his head firmly. "Sentinel stays with me. That's non-negotiable." The standoff continued for several minutes before Dr. Chen finally proposed a solution. Marcus's therapy sessions would temporarily move to the private pool in her residence until the evaluation was complete. Ms. Harper couldn't object to arrangements in a private home, and Marcus wouldn't have to separate from Sentinel. As the health inspector finally left, Dr. Chen's professional composure cracked. "This is harassment, pure and simple. I'm so sorry, Marcus." "Not your fault," Marcus assured her. "The Blackwoods are pulling strings." "It's not just this," she confided, lowering her voice. "The board is seriously considering their offer for the private rehabilitation center. The funding would secure the community center's future, but at what cost?" The pattern continued throughout the day. At Garrison's grocery, Marcus found a newly posted sign stating, "Only certified service animals permitted. Emotional support animals must remain outside." Tom explained apologetically that the health department had conducted a surprise inspection that morning, threatening to cite the store if they didn't enforce stricter animal policies. By the time Marcus reached the outpost for lunch, he wasn't surprised to find a similar sign on their door. What did surprise him was the handwritten addition below it. "All legitimate service dogs welcome. This means you, Sentinel." Inside, the cafe's owner, Mike Patterson, greeted them warmly. "Don't let those signs fool you," he said quietly. "It's just to keep the inspectors off our backs. You and Sentinel are always welcome here." The cafe was unusually busy for a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus recognized many faces from the community meeting, people gathering to share information and support. Mayor Diaz sat in the corner with Sean Patel and several others deep in discussion. "Marcus," the mayor called, waving him over, "we were just talking about Thursday's council meeting. Things are moving fast." She outlined what they knew. The Blackwoods had apparently secured support from at least 3 council members, potentially giving them the majority needed to pass both the service animal ordinance and preliminary approval for their development plan. "We need to make a strong showing at the meeting," Mayor Diaz emphasized. "Every voice matters, especially yours, Marcus." "I'll be there," he promised. "But they're clearly targeting anyone who speaks out. What happened with the health department today wasn't coincidence." Sean nodded grimly. "They're using regulatory harassment, finding any rule or regulation they can leverage against us. My building supposedly needs $50,000 in fire safety upgrades that were never issues during previous inspections. And they're offering solutions at the same time," Mayor Diaz added. "Financial assistance for the upgrades, legal help with regulatory compliance, all contingent on supporting their development plans." The strategy was as effective as it was ruthless. Create problems, then position themselves as the only solution. As the meeting continued, Marcus noticed a familiar face enter the outpost. Caroline Bennett, the Blackwoods investor friend from the dinner at the lodge. She paused just inside the door, surveying the gathered townspeople before spotting Marcus. With a determined expression, she made her way toward his table. Conversation stopped as she approached. Mayor Diaz straightened, her political face slipping into place, while Sean Patel regarded the newcomer with undisguised suspicion. "Mr. Hayes," Caroline greeted him, her polished smile not quite reaching her eyes. "May I join you for a moment? I'd like to speak privately." "Anything you have to say to me can be said in front of my friends," Marcus replied evenly. Caroline hesitated before taking the empty chair beside him. Sentinel shifted position slightly, maintaining his alert but calm demeanor despite the tension. "I'll be direct," she said, lowering her voice. "Things are escalating unnecessarily. Richard sent me to offer a compromise." "What kind of compromise?" Mayor Diaz asked skeptically. "The service animal ordinance would be withdrawn completely," Caroline stated, "in exchange for Marcus's neutrality regarding the development plan. No endorsement needed, just no further public opposition." The offer hung in the air, its implications clear. The Blackwoods were isolating Marcus, trying to remove him from the equation while proceeding with their plans for Paradise Falls. "And what about everyone else?" Marcus asked. "Sean's hardware store, Maggie's diner, the community center?" Caroline's expression remained carefully neutral. "Those are separate issues. This offer concerns you specifically, Marcus." "Because they see me as the most visible opposition," Marcus concluded. "The wounded warrior speaking up for the community makes for bad publicity." "Your words, not mine," Caroline replied smoothly. "But yes, your unique position carries significant moral weight. The Blackwoods are simply offering a mutually beneficial resolution." Marcus studied her for a moment, recognizing the calculation behind the offer. They were trying to neutralize him first, then pick off the remaining opposition one by one. "Tell the Blackwoods I'm not interested in special treatment," Marcus said firmly. "Paradise Falls stands together." Caroline's pleasant facade slipped momentarily, revealing frustration beneath. "Don't be foolish, Marcus. This is a generous offer. The alternative is unnecessary complications for everyone." "Is that a threat?" Mayor Diaz asked sharply. "Just a realistic assessment," Caroline replied, rising from her chair. She paused, looking directly at Marcus. "The council votes Thursday. I suggest you reconsider before then. Some battles aren't worth the collateral damage." As she left, the cafe erupted in conversation, people processing this latest development. Marcus remained quiet, stroking Sentinel's head absently while considering the implications. The Blackwoods had made their move, offering him a way out while threatening escalation if he refused. Thursday's council meeting would be decisive, not just for him and Sentinel, but for the soul of Paradise Falls itself. Thursday evening arrived with an unusual energy crackling through Paradise Falls. The town hall was filled beyond capacity, with people spilling out onto the steps and sidewalk. Marcus arrived early, securing a space near the front where his wheelchair wouldn't block others' views. Sentinel sat beside him, dignified and alert in his service vest. The Blackwoods occupied the front row, Richard and Victoria flanked by James and their legal team. They presented a unified front of power and confidence, occasionally exchanging satisfied glances as if victory was already assured. Mayor Diaz called the meeting to order precisely at 7, her voice steady despite the tension evident in her posture. "We have two significant items on tonight's agenda: the proposed emergency ordinance regarding service animals in public spaces and the revised Blackwood development proposal. Given the high interest, we'll begin with public comments before moving to council deliberation and voting." Richard Blackwood rose first, his voice projecting effortlessly through the chamber. "Paradise Falls stands at a crossroads. Our development plan offers a path to prosperity, growth, and enhanced quality of life for all residents. The service animal ordinance simply ensures public safety while respecting legitimate accommodation needs." His emphasis on legitimate wasn't lost on anyone. Speaker after speaker followed, opinions still divided, but with a noticeable shift toward caution regarding the Blackwoods' plans. Sean Patel described the regulatory harassment his business had faced. Maggie Chen detailed the sudden health inspections targeting her diner. Dr. Chen explained how the proposed private rehabilitation center would effectively create a two-tier system of care in Paradise Falls. When Marcus's turn came, he wheeled to the designated speaking area, Sentinel maintaining perfect position beside him. The room quieted, all eyes on the veteran and his service dog. "3 years ago, I came to Paradise Falls seeking healing," Marcus began, his voice steady and clear. "What I found was a community that valued people for their character rather than their status or abilities. Sentinel has been essential to rebuilding my life, not just through the tasks he performs, but through the independence and dignity he provides." He addressed the council directly. "The proposed ordinance isn't about public safety. It's targeted harassment designed to silence opposition to the Blackwood development plan. I know this because James Blackwood personally threatened to use service animal regulations against me if I continued speaking out." A murmur ran through the crowd. James Blackwood's expression remained impassive, but Richard shifted uncomfortably. "This isn't just about me or Sentinel," Marcus continued. "It's about what kind of community Paradise Falls chooses to be. Will we allow ourselves to be divided and conquered by outside interests who view our town as simply another investment opportunity? Or will we stand together for a future that includes everyone, regardless of wealth, ability, or background?" As Marcus finished speaking, Victoria Blackwood leaned over to whisper something to their attorney, who nodded and made a note. The subtle action wasn't lost on Marcus. They were already planning their next move. Mayor Diaz thanked him, then called for the next speaker. Before anyone could approach, however, a commotion erupted near the entrance. A young man burst through the doors, panic evident on his face. "Fire!" he shouted, pointing back toward Main Street. "The hardware store is on fire!" The room erupted in chaos. Sean Patel rushed toward the doors, followed by many others. Through the open entrance, an orange glow was visible several blocks away, smoke beginning to billow into the evening sky. "Everyone, please remain calm," Mayor Diaz called, trying to maintain order. "The fire department has been notified. Council members, we need to temporarily suspend this meeting." Marcus felt a cold suspicion forming. The timing was too convenient. A major fire just as opposition to the Blackwoods plan was gaining momentum. He glanced toward the front row and noticed James Blackwood checking his watch with what appeared to be satisfaction rather than concern. Outside, people gathered on the town hall steps, watching in horror as flames engulfed the hardware store. The volunteer fire department was already on scene, but the blaze had spread rapidly. Adjacent buildings, including Maggie's diner, were in immediate danger. "My entire inventory," Sean said numbly, standing beside Marcus. "Everything my family built." Marcus watched the Blackwoods emerge from the town hall, Richard already on his phone while James surveyed the scene with clinical detachment. Their expressions contained no surprise, no shock, just calculated assessment. Suddenly, Sentinel's demeanor changed. The German shepherd's ears pricked forward, his body tensing as he stared intently at the burning building. A low growl emerged from his throat. "What is it, boy?" Marcus asked, recognizing the alert posture from their deployment days. This wasn't normal service dog behavior. This was Sentinel's explosive detection stance. The dog looked at Marcus, then back at the fire, his body language unmistakable to anyone who understood his training. Without hesitation, Marcus raised his voice. "Everyone back. There may be additional explosives." The urgency in his voice cut through the chaos. People instinctively stepped away from the burning building. Marcus turned to the fire chief who had been coordinating the response. "Chief, Sentinel is indicating there may be secondary devices. He was trained in explosive detection in Afghanistan." The chief hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Pull back," he ordered his team. "Establish a wider perimeter." Barely 30 seconds later, a secondary explosion rocked the hardware store, sending debris flying across the street. Had the firefighters still been in their original positions, several would have been seriously injured or killed. In the stunned silence that followed, all eyes turned to Marcus and Sentinel. The German shepherd remained alert, continuing to scan the area for additional threats, as he'd been trained to do. "How did you know?" the fire chief asked, his face pale beneath the soot. "I didn't," Marcus replied. "Sentinel did. He's not just a service dog. He was a specialized military working dog with extensive explosives training." Mayor Diaz approached, her expression grave. "This was deliberate," she said quietly. "The timing, the secondary device. This wasn't an accident." Marcus nodded, his suspicions hardening into certainty. He turned to find James Blackwood watching him, the man's composed facade momentarily slipping to reveal something like grudging respect, or perhaps concern that his opponent was more formidable than anticipated. As fire crews worked to contain the blaze and prevent it from spreading to adjacent buildings, the county sheriff arrived, immediately declaring the scene a potential crime site. Marcus recounted what had happened, explaining Sentinel's specialized training and response. "The dog detected explosives from this distance?" the sheriff asked skeptically. "Sentinel was the best explosive detection dog in our unit," Marcus confirmed. "He can detect trace amounts even through fire and smoke. His alert behavior is unmistakable to me." Word spread quickly through the gathered crowd. People looked at Sentinel with new understanding, not just a service dog, but a hero who had potentially saved lives. Victoria Blackwood's earlier disdain for having that dog in public spaces now seemed not just prejudiced, but dangerously ignorant. As investigators began their work, the town council reconvened in the community center, the only space large enough to accommodate the now expanded crowd. The atmosphere had transformed completely. Gone was the division between pro-development and anti-development factions, replaced by a community united in shock and suspicion. Mayor Diaz called the emergency session to order. In light of tonight's events, I move that we postpone voting on both the service animal ordinance and the Blackwood development proposal pending a full investigation. The motion passed unanimously, even the previously pro-Blackwood council members unwilling to appear supportive after such a suspicious incident. Richard Blackwood protested vehemently, but his objections fell on deaf ears. As the meeting concluded, people gathered around Marcus and Sentinel, many apologizing for ever doubting the legitimacy or value of service animals. The German Shepherd accepted the attention with dignified tolerance, still maintaining his working posture despite the commotion. Outside, Marcus found himself face to face with James Blackwood, who had lingered after his brother and Victoria departed in obvious fury. "Impressive dog," James said quietly. "Much more than he appears to be." "Like many of us," Marcus replied evenly. "That's something you and your family never understood about Paradise Falls. There's depth here that can't be seen at first glance, and worth that can't be measured in property values." James studied him for a long moment. "This isn't over, Hayes." "Actually, I think it is," Marcus countered. "The sheriff is already connecting the dots. The timing, the suspicious inspections targeting specific businesses, the convenient secondary explosion. Even if nothing can be proven directly, the Blackwood name is now linked to tonight's events in everyone's mind." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across James Blackwood's face. He opened his mouth to respond, then thought better of it, turning away without another word. In the days that followed, Paradise Falls came together with remarkable unity. A fund was established to help Sean rebuild the hardware store. Maggie's diner, damaged but salvageable, became community headquarters for recovery efforts. The Blackwood development proposal was tabled indefinitely, and the service animal ordinance was not just defeated, but replaced with a resolution affirming the town's commitment to accessibility and inclusion. The Blackwoods departed Paradise Falls as suddenly as they had arrived, their grand vision abandoned in the face of united community opposition and pending investigations. 1 month after the fire, Marcus sat on his porch with Sentinel beside him, watching the first snow of winter dust the mountains. Dr. Chen's truck pulled up the driveway, and she emerged carrying a small package. "Special delivery," she called, climbing the ramp to the porch. Just arrived at the center. The package contained a custom-made medal inscribed with Sentinel's name and the words, "Hero of Paradise Falls." Accompanying it was a certificate officially designating him as an honorary member of the volunteer fire department. The town council voted unanimously. "Dr. Chen explained, smiling as Marcus attached the medal to Sentinel's service vest. They also approved funding for accessibility improvements throughout downtown, including the rebuilding of Sean's store. Marcus ran his hand along Sentinel's back, the dog leaning contentedly into his touch. "Hear that, boy? You're officially a hero now." Dr. Chen sat beside them, watching the snow gently falling. Though he always was, wasn't he? Long before anyone here realized it. Marcus nodded, thinking of all they had been through together. War, injury, recovery, and now defending their home. Sentinel had saved him in more ways than anyone could know, and now he had saved their community too. The German Shepherd looked up at him with those intelligent amber eyes, and Marcus could almost hear what he would say if he could speak. "We did it together. That's what partners do." As the snow continued to fall, transforming Paradise Falls into a winter wonderland, Marcus felt a peace he hadn't known in years. They had faced prejudice and threat, not with violence but with steadfast courage and unwavering dignity. And in doing so, they had helped preserve something precious, a community where everyone, regardless of ability or background, could truly belong.